voters, Crystal, New Hope, and East Plymouth. On behalf of our league, I welcome you to our kickoff meeting, the Voter ID Amendment, what it says, what it means. Our local event tonight is one of the few hundreds happening across Minnesota and our country. I am pleased to see so many of you here. Many members of our league are with us. So if our league members, would you please stand? Great. Thank you very much. Yes, oh, sorry about that. Okay. All right. Also, I'd like to recognize our voter ID committee. Would the members of our voter ID committee please stand? Oh, well, there's more than that, but and I'm one of them too. And she's outside. And one of our members that was on the committee is unable to attend as she's on a trip of a lifetime that was planned long before this date. Our league, Crystal, New Hope, East Plymouth, was founded more than a half century ago. The U.S. League celebrated its 90th birthday several years ago. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization widely known for its voter registration and education efforts. We believe that every eligible American citizen should be able to cast a ballot. The League encourages informed and active participation of citizens in government. It works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support or oppose any candidate or political party. We have three key words: educate, advocate, and reform. There are just three parts to our program this evening. You could have picked up an agenda on your way in, but maybe some of you didn't do that. The first part is the DVD. It's called Democracy for All, The Barriers of Voter ID. Next is a skit featuring some of our members showing a before and after voter ID scenario. Then Mike Freeman will be our speaker. Your questions for Mr. Freeman must be on the card you were handed as you entered. If you need more cards, just raise your hand and a league member will give you one. One of our members will ask your question. Okay. The DVD that we're about to see was produced by the League of Women Voters, Minnesota. It has some facts and figures on how the proposed voter ID amendment will make it harder for many people to vote. This DVD received national recognition at our recent League of Women Voters National Convention. We'll watch the DVD now.
Every American's constitutional right. However, this basic right is in danger. A proposal has been made to require every voter in Minnesota to show a photo ID on Election Day. Your photo ID would have to be issued by the state of Minnesota. More importantly, it would have to show your current address. This requirement would prevent some citizens from voting, like the elderly, the disabled, college students, minority groups, and low-income citizens, citizens who have lost their homes due to the housing crisis. These citizens are less likely to have a valid photo ID, especially with their current address on it. Minnesota's election system is one of the best in the country. Showing a photo ID is unnecessary because Minnesota's election system is sound.
The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. By the time the 19th Amendment was passed, 30 states allowed women to vote, but not all states. So that was why it was essential that it be done at the federal level. The National Woman Suffrage Association was founded in the late 1860s by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. At the the same time, the American Women's Suffrage Association with Julia Ward Howe and Lucy Stone was formed. And so those two groups began to work all around the country, educating people and getting people to understand that it was women's turn for women's suffrage. One of the things that has always been compelling about this story for me is how so many people worked so long and so hard for 72 years to get women the right to vote, and many of those women did not live to see it happen.
Attempts had already been made to secure the right to vote, to secure, when I say secure it, what I mean is that we had the right to vote. We weren't allowed to exercise it. As Dr. King came into the movement, it was really critical to encourage people to take these terrible risks to vote. And they did. Sharecroppers, middle-class folks, poor folks, black folks took their lives in their hands to exercise the vote. The passage of the Voting Rights Act was so critical to the African American community because you have to understand that after slavery, and because of slavery, we outnumbered white people in most southern towns. And you see, so suppressing the vote was really critical to controlling the vote. It is important to not only have the legislation, but to also have the public will to see that it is carried forth. So we have not only the law, but the spirit and the intent of the law.
Voting is not a privilege. It is a constitutional right. The right to vote is protected by more constitutional amendments, the 1st, 14th, 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments, than any other right that we enjoy as Americans.
Along with being costly to implement and completely unnecessary, these bills will deny the vote to United States citizens by adding to the difficulty of same-day registration and by requiring registered voters to provide a current government-issued photo ID. And they will exclude some very specific groups.
Requiring photo ID is not only an unnecessary waste of scarce public resources and another unfunded mandate on local governments who are already struggling, it's a barrier that could result in countless Minnesotans being denied their right to vote.
Today's students are tomorrow's educated citizens and workers. It is essential that we engage them today to ensure that Minnesota continues to lead the country in voter participation. If we make it more difficult for them to vote now, what message are we sending to them about our desire for them to be active and engaged citizens of the future?
Our state is too good to play politics with democracy.
Minnesota, traditionally, since we went to election day registration in 1973, has had the highest rate of voter participation in federal elections for the entire period after that. I think there are three things that are important to me as far as conducting an election systematically. Number one is accuracy. I think the public expects us to be 100% accurate 100% of the time, and although that probably is not a realistic goal in the real world, that is the goal toward which we are striving. Number two, the system should be accessible. It needs to be available to the public, that we want to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote is able to vote. And then third, the system should be transparent, that whether it's a voter or candidate, someone from a political party, should be able to see what's going on at every stage of the election process, and that we should be able to verify everything that we're doing as a part of the election after Election Day is over. And I think the fact that we had the two statewide recounts in 2008 and 2010 is pretty good evidence that we're doing just that, and that we were able to satisfy the parties involved that the process we used to conduct both of those elections was according to the law.
In 2010, the Nobles County Attorney stated that some people expressed concerns about illegal immigrants voting, but he hadn't had a single documented case of this reported to him.
Americans are killed by lightning more often than they're victimized by any sort of fraud that ID stops.
I'm not sure voter fraud and photo ID should be used together in the same sentence. I think they're used together a lot, but I'm not convinced that there is a good reason to do so. Why is that? There's no evidence of a problem with voter fraud. Moreover, as a solution to voter fraud, you need to look at a few things. What is voter fraud? Is voter fraud a problem? What is the nature of that fraud, and what is the solution? Photo ID as a solution, what it does for us is when you go to the polls, it's a way for someone to look at a picture and look at the name in the poll book and see if, in fact, you are the same person that is presenting themselves to vote as those written in the poll book. Which means the only kind of fraud that protects against is if someone's presenting themselves as somebody else, and that's called voter impersonation. There is no evidence that voter impersonation is a problem anywhere in this country. Photo ID isn't the fix.
What they're doing by signing the roster is swearing to us under oath, under penalty of perjury, that they are who they say they are, that they live where they say they live, that they have been a resident of the state for the required period of time, that they are a citizen of the United States, that they're 18 years of old, and that they acknowledge that if they give us any information that is false, that they are liable to a fairly severe criminal penalty, which is up to 5 years imprisonment or $10,000 fine or both.
I've heard that voting gives each of us a voice, that we can express ourselves through voting.
The reason it would be harder for a person with a disability to vote is, one, they have to have their PCA have time to get them ready to go vote. The second thing is transportation. They have to schedule transportation to get to the office to go and vote. The third thing is financial, finding the money and the resources to go and vote.
So any barrier that we put up that might cost someone money is going to be a problem for many people with disabilities, most of whom are low income, and many of us are not employed at all.
Since I turned 18, I moved 12 times. I went to school on the East Coast and did a couple internships around the country, and have just lived basically every 6 months prepared to pack my bags and move someplace else. The last time I moved was right around the election season. I was living in one neighborhood during the primary and moved on September 1st to a different neighborhood, so I voted in a different precinct for the general election. So it was a very quick turnover, but I was fortunate that the mechanisms in place gave me no hassle, that I could vote without having a photo ID that had those temporary addresses, and I could very easily register myself and my new roommates.
On election day, I vouched for several moms I know who are staying in emergency shelter a few floors just below me. One mom voted for the first time in years, and it made her feel extremely happy to finally feel a part of society. People lose their housing for so many reasons that are out of their control. Renters get foreclosed on, jobs are lost, and domestic violence and divorce, just to name a few. But when people are homeless and they still show up to vote on election day, they're saying, I'm working to make my life better, and I refuse to give up. When moms are fleeing abusive partners, they are thinking about their children, not about packing documents or other forms of identification. Hundreds of Minnesotans who are eligible to vote simply are too poor to afford stable housing. Minnesotans in poverty should not lose the right to vote.
The World War II veterans are from 85 to 95 years old, and or older, but for them to have to come up with an ID, I don't think that's the thing to do. Not at all. It just all of a sudden tells you, well, we're not sure about you. You know, I'm sure I didn't fight this war, so I could show you when I'm 85 years old that I am a veteran and a citizen of the United States. I think I've proven that all the way through that I am. And it would be so wrong. It would be so wrong if I'm a voter in Washington County, and I've been a voter in Washington County since 1973, and all of a sudden in 2011 I go to vote and I don't have identification with me, and therefore I cannot vote. You can't do that to a person.
One of my concerns about seniors and photo IDs, people who are shut-ins, they don't have the transportation to even go and get the photo ID if they're able to. They don't have, they have to pay to get where they're going to get the photo ID. It's just a difficult thing.
I don't have a state ID with my address in St. Cloud on it. My address from Rochester's on it.
I'm from the cities, so I live here in St. Cloud, and I have my St. Cloud address here, and it's not going to work, obviously, for me. Then that would, discourage me from going to vote if I can't do it.
Voting should be fair to all the citizens of the United States. And I have to admit, I've become more aware of those restrictions since I have become more restricted.
A 2006 survey showed that 11% of voting-age citizens do not have a current, unexpired, government-issued photo ID. Percentages among certain groups: 18% of those aged 65 and over, 15% of those earning less than $35,000 per year, 25% of African Americans, 8% of white Americans. 18% of those aged 18 to 24 do not have photo ID with their current address and name.
Supporting documents to obtain a Minnesota photo ID at present includes certified birth certificates that cost $26 and certified copy of marriage license if a person's birth certificate doesn't match the name because of marriage, so they may need that, and that costs $9. So in many cases, supporting documents could cost $35.
The fact that the majority feels that certain people shouldn't have certain rights has almost always been a black eye on our nation's history. And history has always borne out that we are better off expanding the franchise. We are better off having more Americans participating in the entire process. So we're all representative, we're all self-determinative, we're all part of the political process. And so when we look at popular statistics and say, well, more people want it than don't, well, when more people aren't impacted than don't, not sure that that is the best test for eliminating rights for individuals, to undermining the rights of the minority.
I care. I care.
I care. I care. I care.
I have voted.
I have voted.
I have voted all my life.
Voting is important to me.
Voting is important to me.
Voting is very important to me. I want to continue to vote.
I want to continue to vote.
Voting is my constitutional right.
Voting is my constitutional right.
I will vote.
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 Voting is fundamental to our democracy.
Voting is fundamental to our democracy.
I will continue to vote.
I will continue to vote. I will continue to vote.
It works.
It works. It works.
Every citizen who wants to vote should be able to vote.
Every citizen who wants to vote should be able to vote.
I oppose voter ID.
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 First time I ever attended a meeting of the League of Women Voters of Crystal, New Hope, and East Plymouth was in 1995, and Bev Hogan recruited me while in a canoe out in Annandale at the lake. And I don't live in this area. I live in Minnetonka. But I came to the first meeting, and there were some of the lovely ladies from this league doing a little skit about the suffragettes who had given women the right to vote. And I was just so impressed with the talent of the people here, as well as their goodwill, that I decided that even though this wasn't my area, that I would join this league. So in that spirit, we've prepared a little skit today to show what happens now if someone comes in to register to vote, and what might happen if the voter ID amendment passes. We don't know for sure what would happen because the details are going to have to be worked out should the amendment pass. But if it's similar to what was passed prior to this and was vetoed by Governor Dayton, then we have kind of a clue about what might happen. So we'll just do this little quick skit, and I think we'll have some fun with it. My cast has gone into, they've equipped themselves with wigs and all kinds of props to make the scene realistic. So here we go. It's voting day in Minnesota. Well, hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Are you registered to vote in this precinct?
No, I'm not. I'm a senior citizen, and I have just moved to a senior residence nearby, and I've applied for my voter ID, or for my Minnesota ID, but I haven't received it in the mail yet. But I do have my paperwork.
All right. So you do have your preliminary work for your driver's license or your voter ID or your Minnesota ID?
I do.
Okay.
I do here.
All right.
Here
All
it
right.
is.
And if you have that, then that will be good enough for you to re-register to vote now in this precinct. You'll have to do that, and then you'll be able to get a ballot and vote.
Oh. Thank you.
You can use that number from that, yes. You can have your ballot. Okay, and here it looks like we have a veteran. Are you registered to vote in this precinct?
Well, 8 years ago I was, but I've been posted overseas, so I haven't voted lately, but I'm wondering just what I need to do.
Well, let's see if you're still on the roster. No, it looks like you're not. The Secretary of State does scrub the roster after 4 years if a person hasn't voted. Do you have a current Minnesota driver's license or ID?
I have my military ID. Would that work?
It will work for identifying who you are, but we will need to have some utility bill perhaps in your name to verify that you live in this precinct.
Well, I think most of our utility bills are in my husband's name, so now what do I do?
Well, you would need to bring your husband back or a neighbor who can verify and sign a voucher that you do live in this precinct at the place you say you live, and then you would be able to vote.
Okay, well,
But that will happen today. You'll have to do that today.
All right, I'll do that. Thanks for your help.
Okay, thank you. Well, hello. Happy to see you coming in.
Yeah.
And are you registered to vote in this precinct?
Well, I'm going to school in this precinct. I just turned 18. But I haven't registered.
Well, do you have a Minnesota ID or driver's license?
Mm-hmm. Here someplace.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay, I see. But this is you have an ID, an address here that's in Rochester, and this is not Rochester. You have to have an address in this precinct. But do you go to school in this precinct?
I do. I really meant to vote in Rochester, but I couldn't get a ride home today. You know, I got to get to school. And the teacher has tests and stuff, you know. I can't miss school, and nobody would give me a ride today. Tuesday's not a good day to get a ride home.
Do you have a student ID? If you have a student ID, I can check if your school has given us a list of students and their addresses in this precinct. Okay, that's your student ID, and that's what you'd need. And let me check our list from your school. What school is it?
Minnesota.
Okay, looking on my list, and your name again is
Beverly Hogan.
Okay, Beverly Hogan, and I see you are on our list. So you also may register to vote in this precinct today, but you can only vote in one place. So you have to decide if you're voting here.
Oh yes, I'll have to vote here because I can't get home.
Okay. So you will need to register using your voter ID and your name on our list.
Show my ID when
yes, and that you're on the list that they'll have over there at the desk. And you could have used a fee statement also if you weren't on the list, but since you are on the list, that'll be sufficient.
Oh, good. I'm so excited about voting for the first time. Thank you.
Okay. And that is the way things happen now, hopefully, if everything goes well. So now we're going to go through the same scenario with the possible new rules under the strict state-issued voter ID. Hello, welcome to our precinct. Are you registered? Do you have a state-issued voter ID?
No, I just recently moved to the senior residence nearby, and I've applied for my Minnesota ID, and I haven't got it in the mail yet. So, but I do have the paperwork for that. Let me find the paperwork.
Okay, but we do have to have the voter ID itself, the picture ID, and this won't have your picture on it, and so I'm afraid that is not going to work. What we can do is we can give you a provisional ballot.
What is that?
This would be a ballot that would you could cast today, but it would not be counted until you return to a state authorized office with your voter ID, your picture voter ID, within the next few days.
If it doesn't come in the mail, and then I don't drive anymore, and my children live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and so how am I going to get there?
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I have to tell you that this is the best we can do. We'll just have to see if you can find a way to get there, find a neighbor or a friend to drive you. I'm sorry. But do you want to cast your provisional ballot?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Okay.
I'll do that, but will it count?
We don't know.
You don't know?
We can't tell until you have to have the valid voter ID before it will count.
I need to bring the picture?
Yes.
Oh. Okay.
Okay. Hello. Are you registered to vote with a voter ID in this precinct?
I'm not right now, but I have my military ID so that I can get registered.
You have a military ID, but that is not what we need. We need a state-issued voter ID from Minnesota.
Well, this has my picture on it, and I use it for my VA benefits.
Well, I'm sorry, but that won't be sufficient for voting in Minnesota at this time. We can give you a provisional ballot, and if you are able to come in to a state-authorized office within a few days, that ballot will be counted. But until then, it will be in a separate section of the votes.
Seriously, I had to take time off work today to come in and vote, and you're telling me that I now have to come back and provide additional ID?
I'm sorry, that's the election law.
Well, thank you. For nothing.
Hello. Do you have a voter ID with an address in this precinct?
Okay, here's my problem. I do have a valid voter ID, but my address on it is Rochester, and that's where my parents live. I thought I could get down there today, but my mean old professor assigned me this huge science project, and I had to do some lab work, you know. I really want to vote because I just turned 18 and this is my first time. Isn't there some way? Will my student ID be enough?
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid not. Under the new election law, you have to have the valid state-issued voter ID with your picture on it and your address in this precinct. So it looks like you should have maybe sent for an absentee ballot from your home district.
But I thought I was going to go home.
I know.
I didn't know the professor was going to do that.
I know. It's heartbreaking, isn't it? I'm very sorry.
What a bummer.
And these people tried to vote. Probably none of their votes will be counted, even if they do decide to take the provisional ballot, because of time constraints and other constraints that they may have. We don't know where those authorized offices will be. We don't know how many days or how many hours they'll have to bring in their valid ID, which they don't even have in their possession yet. So odds are that none of these people's vote will be counted. So that is what we may be facing if the voter ID passes. Thank you. Well, now to answer our questions, which I'm sure we have, and to give us a little background on this whole issue, we have our speaker for tonight, Mike Freeman, who is the Hennepin County Attorney. I'm sure that you all recognize his name. He's been in Minnesota politics for quite a while. I was teasing him earlier that he ran for the DFL nomination for governor twice and lost, but then the person who got the nomination lost too, so maybe we would have been better off if he had run. So without further ado, I introduce Mike Freeman.
I love this skit. Well, thank you, and that skit was wonderful. Let's give him a big round of applause. If you all don't mind, I'm going to sit. I left home at 6 a.m. and I drove to Walker, Minnesota, and spoke to our Indian brothers and sisters from Leech Lake, from Red Lake, and from White Earth. And they're very deeply concerned about this amendment as well. And so I'm real happy to be able to sit. Thank you very much. you've gotten some great information. I came early, so I saw the DVD, and the skit really told the story better than I can. Let me just frame up a couple of issues here. Your moderator was kind enough to remember that I've stood for election a couple times. I'm sorry she remembered about the ones I lost, but I guess that's part of the price. But my family and I have stood for election in this state for 60 years. We won some, we lost some. But we always tried to seek to gain people's votes. Unfortunately, what this amendment does is attempt to restrict people's voting. And that's exactly what it will do. Now, supposedly we have a problem in Minnesota with illegal voting. The job of the county attorney is to review each and every allegation of any improper voting. And that's exactly what we do. And after the 2008 election, we were presented with all sorts of over 1,000 claims of improper voting. And when it was all done, we charged 38 people. That's 38 out of 665,000. That's 0.0057%. Now, I had to ask my 13-year-old how I pronounced that. And I'm sure one of the teachers in the group will correct me. He said that's 57 1,000ths of 1%. That's pretty darn small. And each one of those were people who were on probation who hadn't had their civil rights restored. Now, technically and legally, they can't vote. There was no fraud, there was no misrepresentation, there was no impersonation, none. And you may recall the election of 2008 was one of the most closely scrutinized elections in the history of the state. When it was done, my former colleague and Representative Carlson and Senator Rest and former colleague Fritz Knack was the Republican lawyer for Noam Coleman. And he said, quote, "There was no fraud in the 2008 election. We looked for it. We tried to find it. There wasn't any," end quote. Joe Friedberg, the other lawyer in front of the Minnesota Supreme Court, says, "Your Honors, in answer to a question, there was no fraud." So what are these folks talking about? And what do we do about these folks who are voting on probation? Well, we tried to do a simple and direct manner. So for the 2010 election, we sent everyone who was on probation a letter saying, hey, you can't vote. And the folks who had completed their probation, we said, you now can vote. We didn't have 38. We didn't have hundreds. We had 10. And oh, by the way, we had one double voter. Somebody who lived in a suburb that I won't name moved to another suburb that I won't name. But he went back to the place that he left because he didn't like a particular city council member. So he could vote against him. So he voted against and voted once, and then he went to his own precinct where he now lived and voted. And, of course, we caught him, and he had to plead guilty, and he's got a felony in his record. And we made him pay a fine, which is what the law requires. So, first up, we don't have a problem. One of the tragedies that's happened in modern-day politics is some folks will say something that has no factual basis, and they'll say it again and again and again. And when you say something that's wrong, or that's false, or that's a lie, and you say it over and over again, that doesn't make it true. But those of us who know better, because that's my job to investigate that, can tell you so it's not a problem. So the first thing about this photo ID is a solution chasing after a problem because we don't have one. The second thing is implementing it is going to be very expensive. I'm going to try not to repeat what the skit in the DVD said, but an independent study by Professor Schultz says $50 million or more. Now, I don't know about you, but for local units of government to raise $50 million, that's called a property tax. And property tax also goes to pay for things like the police officers that are here and the firefighters that are here and the road clearing and the road repair. You know, if we got an extra $50,000, I'd rather spend it on better uses there than chasing after this problem that isn't a problem. Finally, it restricts voting. Now, the skit does it better than I can do it. But we know that seniors in nursing homes, we know veterans overseas, We know veterans in nursing homes. We know students who are on campus but their driver's license is at their home residence. All of those individuals be discriminated against. They won't be able to vote. In my view, democracy functions better when more people participate. And by the way, all these folks are saying how bad our process is. Well, first off, we lead the nation in voting, and they have for year after year. And we should be pretty proud of it. And we have clean elections. And 2010 was scrutinized pretty closely, too. There was no fraud. There was no problems there. This is a method for voter repression and restriction. And it doesn't make much sense to me. That's not what a constitution is supposed to be about. A constitution is supposed to protect our rights. Look at like the First Amendment to the United States Congress in the United States Constitution. Congress shall make no laws abridging the freedom of speech. That's protecting our right to speak. And we're seeing that played out right now with that horrible, duplicable film that some folks in other countries can't understand why our government doesn't censor that. Anybody in favor of the government making decisions of what's written or what's said? I don't think that's not the job of government. We don't do it very well. Let me finish with a personal story, if I may. My father was a wounded Marine Corps veteran of World War II, and they almost blew his jaw off. My father stood for election 6 times, and he was elected governor of Minnesota 3 times. When I took him to vote, the last time he voted in the nursing home, somebody who lived in that nursing home had to vouch for him because he no longer had a vote. He no longer had a driver's license. A man who served his country, both in the military and as governor, couldn't have voted under this amendment. You know something, folks? That's just wrong. Thank you for letting me share you that story. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Yes, sir. Oh, no. Sorry. You got to follow the rules. God, if the county attorney doesn't follow rules, I'm in trouble, right? Are you going to send me back, Lynn? Yeah.
Well, here's the first question. Is proof of citizenship required in order to register to vote? I'm confused about the distinction between eligibility, citizenship and residence, and identity.
Wow, I had law school professors who asked me questions like that. Well, first off, the Minnesota Constitution in Article 7, Section 1 says, in order to vote in Minnesota, you have to be a citizen of the United States for at least 3 months, and you have to live in the precinct where you seek to vote for 30 days. That's the requirement. Citizen, 18, live there for 30 days. There's a lot of questions about how we're going to meet the adequate proof of this, of registering to vote under this amendment. You know, they could have exempted our military serving overseas, and there were amendments on the floor of the Minnesota House and Senate. The Democrats all voted for it, and the Republicans voted against those amendments. There were amendments that came up that would have permitted seniors in nursing homes to do that. All the Democrats voted for those amendments, and none of the Republicans. I mean, one of the things we've done in the state to help create this high level of voting is we've always done it in a bipartisan way. It didn't matter who had the majority in the legislature or the governorship, we did it. And recently, when Governor Pawlenty was governor, and Mark Ritchie was Secretary of State, and they're not in the same political party, they went to the legislature, who overwhelmingly in a bipartisan way voted to move the primary from September to August so our people overseas could vote. That's how we do that. Well, this voter ID passed with not a single Democratic vote and went to the governor and was vetoed. Now, I had the privilege of serving 8 years in the Minnesota Senate. And if you got something passed or you're having a hard time getting passed, you went and talked to the other side and figured out what's wrong with it. And you worked with it and you tried to come up with it. We didn't have any of that. This group of folks just went back and said, okay, we're going to legislate by putting things in the Constitution. Folks, that's not how you're supposed to do it. And that's what gives the consternation and the questions about citizenship and residency and domicile. Now, I think I went off a little on a tangent on your question. But it's presumed if you were born in this country that you were a citizen of this country. So that's why a birth certificate will normally establish your citizenship so that you can vote. If you can prove that and that you were 18 and you live here, you do that. But a lot of particularly older folks don't have a birth certificate. They may have been born in a rural community that they didn't have them, or voted in a state where they didn't. Or our Indian sisters and brothers who didn't keep those kind of records. You know, it just seems kind of foolish if somebody's voted for 50 years, suddenly take their right away. Trying to stop a problem that doesn't exist. I'll try to be more precise with your next question.
Okay. Why is there so much intense opposition to using voter ID to benefit increasing the efficiency of the check-in process at the polls for first-time voters, unusual spelling of names, language barriers, and accents?
Well, I've never been an election judge, but I sure voted a lot of times. And they've never had a problem with us or the people standing in line trying to vote. And, you know, many of the election officials in your precincts are folks in this room. League of Women Voters has proudly had probably a larger percentage of their membership as election officials than any other group. And you've provided good service. There's lots of new technology coming along that may make sense for us to use. For example, you can have picture voting books. So the book that you go and has your name and your address and you sign, the technology is there or very close to being there to have your picture next to it. And for example, everybody with a driver's license will automatically be there, and the Department of Motor Vehicles keeps pictures for 10 years. So my mom, who gave up her driver's license, wouldn't have to go get a new picture ID and stand in line to get that at age 91. She could use her old picture. But this constitutional amendment doesn't permit that. So there's lots of good ways to do it. This is way too limiting. And again, it's trying to solve a problem that, folks, doesn't exist.
Okay. Regarding military and tribal voters, isn't it true that federal law supersedes state law and ensures their IDs are valid for voting?
Well, if federal law superseded state voting laws, then Al Gore would have been elected president of the United States, because it was Florida state law that decided that election. So we have a federal system. Some things states do, and sometimes the feds preempt the states. But the voting laws are set by the states unless they violate the federal Constitution. And that's why each state does it. Now, maybe it would make sense to have one system. But, the more IDs, the more the government knows where I live and my address and what I do. I bet everybody in this room read George Orwell, 1983. Or is it 84?
84.
You can tell I've been up a long time. 1984. Remember all that? We were kind of worried about what Big Brother would look. Well, it's very interesting. The same group of folks who want no regulation of the financial industry in New York want to have all of us walking around with all these IDs. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense to me. Because if you voted in the same precinct for 50 years and you don't have a driver's license or a state-issued ID, should you not be able to vote? I don't think so. That just seems to be form over substance. And again, nobody has shown me a problem that photo ID will solve that merits spending $50 million and restricting the voting of a lot of people. They just haven't done it.
And the next question is, can you update us on the illegal vouching case from 2010, where there were 2 incidents of people vouching for people they didn't know, at the University Lutheran Church near the U of M?
Yeah, certainly, because we investigated that and we investigated it carefully. There are a number of errors in the factual statement. This was a case in which an individual vouched for a number of other folks. The law says that you can't vouch for more than 15 folks, and you have to know they live in the precinct. First off, the proof is in the pudding. Every person who was allegedly improperly vouched for was 18, was an American citizen, and did live in that precinct. The question here was there sufficient evidence that they did live in the precinct? And when we reviewed that, we concluded that there was. So, I mean, I know that there's all sorts of folks who've got all sorts of theories and like to twist facts, but I reviewed every single piece of paper in that. And if I found something wrong, just like I did the guy in the double voter, just like we did a few of the people on probation who shouldn't have voted, we'll charge them. And, you know, folks, we charge 10,000 felonies a year. We're not shy because we need to do that to keep the public safety. But for the folks who think that was a chargeable case, well, four different lawyers looked at that and we all came independently to the same conclusion. And I stand behind that conclusion.
Well, there's a question here having to do with same-day registrations. The questioner is concerned that they cannot be verified, and I would imagine they mean verified as to address, after the ballots are cast. So what about the number of same-day registrations that cannot be verified after ballots are cast?
You know, our system of enforcement relies on the veracity of the individual voting. And if they err, if they commit a crime, if they don't live in the precinct, if they vote in two places, we investigate, we charge, and we convict them. And of the 38, I said that I charged in 2008, and only the 11 in 2010, because almost all of those were people on probation who shouldn't have voted. We dropped that number, but we charged the folks who violated that. So the same-day registration basically says you have to come and prove that you are 18, you're a U.S. citizen, you live in the precinct. So if you have a driver's license or an address where you're living in that precinct, that's sufficient. If you don't have that, you could bring a utility bill that shows that you live in a place. Or you can have a person vouch for you. And that's what roommates do. That's what people do for folks who live across the street. And, you know, after all the smoke and the falsehoods propagated by certain people who want to restrict your vote, we simply don't have very many problems here. They'd like to restrict your vote and suggest they do. The fact is their facts are wrong, and they keep perpetrating them even though they are in error.
And this question is, isn't it true that voter turnout has increased everywhere voter ID has been implemented?
Sounds like we've been infiltrated with our questions by folks who support this. Hi, guys. You know, one of the places they always cite is Indiana, and they say that Indiana increased its voting by 2%. Great, Indiana. You went from 37 to 39. Minnesota's been 70 without this crap, and we don't need it.
Here's a question. My son, now this isn't me, my son is 20 years old and lives at my Minnesota address. I know he is not planning to vote. What keeps me from taking his place at the voting booth?
Because I don't think you look like your son at all. You know, I had the privilege of serving Richfield and East Bloomington in the Minnesota Senate for 8 years, and I raised my kids and lived there for 25 years and voted in the same precinct. The wonderful folks who ran that precinct voted. They knew all of us, and they simply wouldn't allow and permit this kind of wrongdoing that the myth makers are making. And one of the things we did, which I really liked in Richfield, they got kids from the high school to come serve, to learn, kind of junior election officials. My son went, and boy, he learned more about elections and more about the right thing and more about citizenship. One of the tragedies with all these falsehoods that are flying around is it's scaring folks. And they're trying to suggest that we don't have a good system. Folks, we're Minnesotans. We do. This isn't Florida. This isn't Mississippi. You got the cases, you show them to me. That's my job, and I'm proud of the job I do it. And we prosecuted the folks who didn't. And in other things, in other election things, we haven't been shy about prosecuting wrongdoers. But something? Justice says you don't prosecute people and you don't tell fibs just to make hay. You do it because that's your job, and you do it well, and it has to be available for public scrutiny.
Couple more here. I think this might refer to getting the Minnesota license at the state. Does voter ID address someone's eligibility to vote? Yeah. Does voter ID address someone's eligibility to vote?
Well, part of our real problem with trying to put this in the Constitution is it's not spelled out very well. It says a valid government-issued ID. Okay? So what's a government ID? Well, we know a voter's license is. So is a ID from the University of Minnesota, which is a state institution. Is that valid? We don't know. And if that's valid, is one from a private college valid? We don't know. Now, I would interpret that a valid government ID should include a tribal identification card, because a tribal identification card is issued by a sovereign nation of Indian people, and they go through scrutiny to do that. But when they tried to put a clarification of that into the constitutional amendment, every single Republican in the Minnesota House and Senate voted against it. That was a clarification that should have been made. So the answer is, okay, after the constitutional amendment is passed, we're going to take care of all that with enabling legislation. Well, I don't buy a used car without opening up the hood and seeing if there's an engine in it. This is just not good government. I'm going to be giving a lot of speeches over the next 30, 40 days on this, because there's so many falsehoods about it. And, there's things, we can always do things to improve our process and our system. And I really think, as I said earlier, I think these election books with the pictures in them, as the technology comes, that can make sense. And think of the technology we know and the things we use now today that didn't exist 3 to 5 years ago. So why are we writing something in the Constitution that will tie us down to one thing? So we can amend the Constitution every year? The United States Constitution has got, history professors,
27.
27? That's pretty good. And 10 came at the first beginning. Now, Minnesota has more. And, there's some folks that suggest that we have some things that we've amended to our Constitution we really didn't need to do. But the problem is if you put things in the Constitution that remove people's rights. That document is supposed to protect our rights. This doesn't. This takes rights away.
My friend, again, this is not my friend. My friend says he has to have ID to cash a check and other things. So what's the problem?
Simple answers to complex questions usually aren't very valid. Okay? There's a lot of places that don't ask me for an ID when I cash a check. And how many people really cash checks anymore, huh? I haven't. I guess I've done 2 or 3, and I always go to the same place because they know me. That's what we have cash cards for. That's what we have credit cards for. That's what we have all sorts of things. But, cashing a check isn't a constitutional right. The right to vote we earned. I'm a proud veteran of the Vietnam era. I didn't serve nearly the way lots of folks did. But I raised my hand, and I was in for 10 years. Okay? And I'm just merely following my father's lead. But I fought so people can vote and vote freely. Not so we can have all sorts of restrictions, so our seniors and our veterans and our people overseas and our students can't vote. That restricting the franchise hurts democracy. Now, there are a couple elections I've been in when too many people voted because they voted against me. I'll acknowledge that. But something, that's part of the business. And, if you don't stand for office, you can't stand to lose. But the privilege of serving has been profound. But I'm proud that the people were not restricted in their right to vote when they went to vote either for me or for the other person.
We have a few questions here that are probably have been covered in the things that Attorney Freeman has already talked about. But I think that if the people who wrote these questions would like to ask him privately afterward, I'm sure you would agree to address these. But they are things that in many ways you have talked about already.
And let me just say in conclusion, I really appreciate you all being here. This is an issue that needs to be discussed. You need to share it with your friends. And you need to put the burden on the folks of what is the horrible problem that causes us to amend our Constitution, to cost somewhere, and nobody knows for sure, but independent study by people who are probably a lot smarter than me said $50 million. That's a lot of money we don't have to solve something we don't need. And ladies and gentlemen, I can't support something that wouldn't let my dad vote when he was 86 years old. We need to protect our seniors, we need to protect our veterans, and we need to help our students vote. They got to be eligible. And if they're not eligible and folks really have a real case, you bring it. We'll investigate it. That's my job, and I do it willingly. But I haven't seen that. And I'm tired of this nonsense and these misstatements. It's time to be upfront about this. And if we're making changes in our Constitution, our elections, let's make sure we do it in a bipartisan way. That's how we've always done it, and that's how we ought to do it in the future. Thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you all for your participation this evening. I think it's been a very worthwhile evening for us. This has been cablecast right now, and it will be replayed on Tuesday, September 25th at 8:30 p.m., on Saturday, September 29th at 2 o'clock p.m., and Sunday, September 30th at 2 o'clock p.m. You don't have to remember those times because we have handouts, a yellow one and a white one on the table. Also, I would like to call your attention that our League of Women Voters of Crystal, New Hope, and East Plymouth are having some candidate forums that are coming up in the very near future, well, in October. We have a Robbinsdale Area School District one, we have a Crystal City Council, and a Senate 45, District 45A and B House of Representatives, and also the New Hope City Council. That is also a handout that's out there. And if anyone has moved, we have voter registration blanks on the table behind all the handouts for this forum. Also, something that's really good that our league has done is participate in your government. We have this, and it lists everyone that's representing you, all the way from president to school board members. Maybe I didn't say that quite exactly right, but anyway, everyone that represents you is included in that. If you live in New Hope, Crystal, and in this area, okay, Membership in our league is welcome, and we have that information about leagues and voter registration materials at the back table. So please help yourself to any of the handouts that are out there. Thank you so much for coming. One more thing I'd like to say is have another cup of coffee, please. We have an awful lot of coffee and cookies over there. Yes, it is decaf. Yes, it is decaf.